Link to that. Lead it out. Hello and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. I am Rob Howe. That is Scott Docterman. If you're watching us on the YouTube feed from The Athletic, it is Thursday, May the 25th, about 9:15 a.m. Central Time, our last podcast of May. And we're just kind of slogging our way through the month here. We do have things going on. And I guess at the top of that list would be Iowa baseball. Won its opener Tuesday, convincingly 13-3 against Michigan. Then Michigan went on and won and knocked Illinois out yesterday, I believe it was. So we'll take a look at the bracket there, and Iowa plays at 2 today against Indiana, a team that it lost a season series to. So we'll have revenge on its mind there. We've got a women's basketball staff hire. Not really much of an update on the gambling investigation, but Rick Heller did talk about that with us a little bit on Monday before they headed off to Omaha. Talk a little bit about why we do not have a Big Ten's scheduling format for 2024 and beyond yet. Not just kind of some housekeeping stuff here more than anything beyond baseball. Iowa track and field is out in Sacramento at the West Regional. Some preliminary events yesterday. They'll get into high gear today out in Sacramento, and that runs through Saturday. Check out HawkeyeSports.com for, I think they have some type of live result linkage on there. Scott and I are kind of propped up here. We've both done our fair share of lawn duty, yard duty. That's what May brings. But our backs are holding up well enough to do a podcast, Scott.
Yeah, thank God. I gotta do some serious stretching. This weekend I moved my kids back from Minneapolis here, and so that includes the U-Haul truck and a lot of loading and then a lot of unloading and moving over to the empty garage or empty storage facility. So then it's like, I can just imagine what my Tuesday morning's going to be like. So, I'm going to be, all right, I'm going to have to hit the massage parlor and the chiro on that day, but all things good. It's beautiful outside. It's going to be a great couple of days before we get into the hellstorm that is summer in the Midwest. But all things, it's beautiful weather, and hey, going up the Memorial Weekend, you couldn't ask for better.
Lift with your legs. That's what they tell you. And then I always forget and hurt my back anyway. But I've shot a lot of photos the last 2 nights, a lot of high school things going on in the area, a lot of really good competition, kids going to state. Softball and baseball has started in Iowa for high schools already, believe it or not. So state soccer coming around the bend. So we wind in, but pretty much rounding up the 2022-23 college athletic season with baseball and track still going at the University of Iowa. Baseball wise, Scott, let's jump in there. A little bit of a shuffling of the rotation, if you will. Rick Heller going with Brody Brecht today on, again, we're recording a little bit before, 5 hours before the game. So some of this may be stale by the time you listen to it, but Brody Brecht will be on the mound today, following up Marcus Morgan on Tuesday. And that would mean it's really big, Scott, the new format in baseball here. Iowa won on Tuesday and was rewarded with a day off on Wednesday. Win today, you're rewarded again with a day off and takes you all the way to Saturday. Big game today.
Yeah, it is. And it's against a good team too. I mean, a team that's that beat them twice, 2 out of 3 this year, which is why they had the higher seed. And so, and Indiana's a quality program. It's one of the better ones. I think Indiana and Maryland are probably the top 2, and Iowa and probably Nebraska are in that next echelon year in and year out. And Michigan, of course, because Michigan had that freakish championship appearance a couple of years ago. That still blows my mind. But it's kind of like if Purdue got to the CFP or something, so Michigan getting to the championship game in baseball. But no,
I should mention too that the softball team won the equivalent of the NIT. So congratulations to them. I wanted to do that before I forgot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also a good point, Rob, because as we saw what the program was like under Gail Blevins all those years. And she was, she left under, not real great terms, I suppose. The program really hit the pot. And now the fact that it won its last game in the postseason, winning a tournament like that, the way they won it, I thought, hey, that's a great way to go out. It really builds momentum, and it shows that Renee Gillespie has done some good things with that program.
Yeah, she needs to use it as, bless you, Scott's having a sneeze attack. See, this is what happens when you're out in the grass.
I know, man. I was
out
at 7:30 in the morning.
I've been sneezing all week.
Yeah.
But hopefully softball can use that as a springboard, and good to see. It was good that they were able to get into that event and then win it in an exciting fashion. Definitely something to build on. And from a baseball perspective, Brody has he hit a rough patch there for a while, Scott, but he looked good last Saturday at Northwestern, got himself kind of back on track there. With he and Marcus Morgan, it usually comes down to command and control. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have the stuff. Both of them are high level Division I pitchers when they're on. But they're only sophomores. They're second-year sophomores, and they're still work. I mean, Marcus has made an incredible jump from last year to this year. We talked to him on Monday. And I know he was injured in high school and he missed one of his basketball seasons, but last year was definitely, I asked him, I said, is that the most adversity you had faced, in your athletic career? And he said, oh yeah, by far. And, had to deal with it mentally, physically, but give the kid credit. He's kind of worked his way through it. He's now the Friday starter, for lack of a better term, because it's not always Friday now that they're in the postseason, but you get it if you follow college baseball. But these two guys, Scott, I mean, okay, you make a run here, and we're not going to put the cart ahead of the horse here, but if they can make a run here into the weekend, get a decent regional spot, and you line up those two guys at the top of your rotation and they're on, I know those are big ifs, but the potential is there.
No question. I think they're both pro pitchers, and obviously we know what Brody brings, but Marcus was probably the highest ranked quarterback to not select a football team. As a dual threat guy, he chose baseball, and he has
had an Iowa State offer,
right? And he's coming on strong. He probably would have been a MAC quarterback, and probably another position at a Power 5, but still, he had it. He's ranked a 3-star, legitimate 3-star, and now he struggled. Brody's but then has made strides, and he's the Friday starter. Brody, we all know the all-world talent that he has. It's really about control with him. If he can have a little more consistency and not walk as many people, Jesus, he's Nuke LaLoosh on the mound, really, in some ways, because sometimes he's so wild, but he's also just incredible talent, and the Big Ten recognized that as a first team all Big Ten. And but if they get into a position where they're both playing well, then they're going to be very, very difficult to that they could go into the NCAA regional, and you got a 1 and a 2 like that, they're going to be in games. Now Marcus yesterday kind of showed the strength and the weaknesses that he's had, and he put it on full display 2 days ago, I should say. One is he's pretty, he was able to hold them to 1 run, but then the other part was he was walking guys, and his control wasn't real good. But they have so much potential, and where they are, and what they've been able to do hitting wise, even without Keaton Anthony, has been really impressive. Had another grand slam, 9th of the year the other day, and this team is a legitimate NCAA team, no question in my mind, and it's probably a team that can win. They can win at least a game when it's there, and if they get some good performances on the mound, they could be a threat to go to the final regional game and end up possibly even in a super regional.
awesome performance by Jack Whitlock the other day, coming out of the bullpen. He came in and kind of put the fire out for Marcus and struck out 3 there in the 5th inning. And then Iowa was able to put up a crooked number, get 6th spot, I think, courtesy in large part to Braden Frazier's grand slam that Scott spoke of. Cedar Rapids, Jefferson's own Braden Frazier. They're good to see the local kid come through there. And like in talking to Sam Peterson on Monday, he said, I was like, how have you guys stayed together? And it's not the first time this question's been asked, but he with what's going on, and we'll talk a little bit about the gambling investigation in a minute, but they've not missed a beat. They've won I think they've lost 2 games since Keaton Anthony and those guys. 8-2. So, I mean, to be able to do that and have guys like Frazier step up is really a testament to the culture and the chemistry within this program to be able to do that. A lot of teams would fold or at least struggle a little bit, have an adjustment period, whatever. They haven't done that. Now, they certainly would like to get Keaton Anthony's bat back in the lineup. But I just, we talked to Rick about it on Monday, Scott, and he basically was like, and this is kind of what we all knew. The administration has no answers because they're just waiting like everybody else here. You're not going to speed up and invest. They're going to do it at their own rate, and you just have to wait. You're at the mercy of them completing this investigation. And from what Rick said, they were still gathering information. They want to make sure they have all the information before making a judgment.
Yeah, I've talked to people at Iowa and Iowa State about this because there's really, as you said, there's not a lot to report right now when it comes to the gambling situation. Everybody is ruled ineligible. That the campuses, that's the first step, which is why that none of these people are playing. Now it doesn't, I don't know specifically how it affects track and field, and I certainly don't know yet all the names of football and what have you. But then it's in the NCAA's court as to what punishments are dealt at. Then it comes back to an appeal process. And so then, there was a thought that the NCAA would be quicker than normal, or at least understand the timeline. But it's also, the NCAA is going to investigate at its own rate. I mean, and it's not their fault that these players got flagged for gambling, which is against the rules. It's just, yes, the timing could not be worse, but there's also, they're going to go through their process. And I imagine that they've taken this very, very seriously, but, kind of back on the Jack Whitlock situation. I mean, if there's a team MVP, it might be him this year. I mean, he's only started 1 game, but he's 7-0 and he has an ERA of 129. And as you said the other day, he put out the fire. He really allowed them to streamline and everything. I mean, that was just remarkable. I mean, he's just been absolutely terrific for them. And he's the type of pitcher that on short notice in a regional that really can do kind of what he did the other day, which is just step in an adverse situation. And I mean, he's only allowed 3 extra base hits all year. He's struck out 30 and walked 6. It's just, he's, if your MLB team had a long reliever like that, he'd pitch for 20 years. He'd be like Paul Ossenmacher, who's just
good pull.
Yes. I don't know why that name came about, but it did. But and so I think, he's been just remarkable for this team. And they've had a lot of guys who have stepped up at key moments, but his deserves more than just a tip of the cap. It deserves kind of walk out of the dugout and wave to the crowd.
Yeah, and in addition to, those are great points by Scott. You need guys like that. And when Iowa had some bumps earlier in the season, it was the bullpen trying to figure out the right combinations there. And he has really stepped up and done well. And if you're on the Hawk Fanatic podcast feed, you should be. If you're not, you subscribe to our feed, you will find an interview with Jack Whitlock on yesterday's podcast with Pat Hardy and the guys at KCJJ. He was on the show yesterday. Good interview there if you guys want to check that out. So these guys have missed, what do we say, 10 games, Scott?
Yeah.
That out of 53. So
Mhm.
we're kind of still hovering around that, what, 17, 18% of the season range.
Yeah. And, and they'll
I'm
play.
bad at math.
Yeah. If once they, no matter what happens this afternoon, they're going to play again. So then you're looking at 11 out of, 55, 12 out of it. So you're looking at 20+% of their season. Now, and then if they go to regionals, they're guaranteed 2 more games. What does that mean in the big picture? Can they, if it's something where they bet like similar to the Virginia Tech guy, maybe it's, maybe you get another 10 games next year. But if it's less than that, less money, not on college athletics, then I think, they may have an outside chance. I would just hate to predict anything because this is such a situation that we've never really experienced before. And, the NCAA with all the changes in the gambling rules, I would expect, and I understand the rationale to make an example of these schools because you do not want this to happen again. And unfortunately, players who may bet on minor things that need a slap on the wrist might get a smack on the butt instead. And that's really unfortunate, but it's probably in some ways in the big picture, maybe, dare I say, if this was another school, that's probably the right thing to do.
This is, and again, these guys knew the rules. It's not, I made the speeding analogy last week. The sign, the speed limits are posted. We drive over the speed limits. If we get caught, a lot of times we get away with it. But if you get caught, you're the one to blame.
Yeah.
It's not the person that's pulling you over or the person that set the speed limit. It's your fault. Having said that, this is tough on Keaton Anthony on a number of levels. The one is he's a professional baseball prospect. And Rick talked about this on Monday. This is obviously hurting him. I mean, he'd be at the Big Ten tournament now where he's got scouts' eyes on him. They're going to the NCAA tournament. If he misses out on that, the draft is coming up, I think in June or July. They moved it around. I think July. It might be in July now. It used to be in June, but yeah. So that's tough for him to deal with that. But again, you don't want the NCAA to rush through the investigation and get it wrong. You want them to get it right. And unfortunately for Keaton, this hit while he was in his season. And, it could have hit in September. Mm-hmm. Then we would have been dealing with it from football side, but it didn't.
Yeah, and that would have been a much more high profile. Every single day we would have talked about it. We would have tweeted about it. And that's not to take anything away. I mean, baseball is every bit as important to Keaton Anthony and Rick Heller and this team as football is to the players, coaches, or whatever. But the profile is the profile. But I think to use your speeding analogy, the NCAA has to decide what's 29 and a 25 through University Heights. And what's 85 and a 55.
I drove through University Heights yesterday, and that sucker was was right there. But I know better now. Yeah. Sorry.
I know better too. Yes. Same deal with the Hayden Fryway, where it's like, I lost, but or you're driving 85 and a 55 with a suspended license, or with a, I won't say a stolen car, but a car that you took without permission or, tags off. There are different levels to what speeding and enhance is. And I think Iowa State has some real problems that I think we're somewhat aware of. But I think we've heard enough rumors, Rob. I think all of us have, that you can kind of do algebra and maybe get at some names and some possibilities. But I also don't want to do that because I don't want to unfairly call anybody out who maybe it's not as severe as what is rumored. And maybe it's they're going through an appeal process that might either expunge them or put them in a situation where maybe they miss the entire season. So I'd avoid using any names. I have heard some, especially on the Iowa State side. I was at the Cyclone Caravan the other day that would be pretty devastating to them. But still, when it comes to Iowa, Keaton Anthony is devastating to this team because, as you said, they're doing great. They're 8-2. They might, they could be, they're going to play at least 2 more games of the Big Ten tournament. That's fantastic. But, when you're in a super regional, you'd like to have your best players available, and he's their best hitter. He's one of the, he's all Big Ten, first team all Big Ten player. You'd like to have him available to compete.
There was a survey, Scott, that was done. I don't know if you saw this. NCAA study finds almost 60% of college students engage in sports betting activity. You can find the study if you Google it. Surveyed 3,527 college students aged between 18 and 22 during April, found that 58% of students had engaged in at least one form of sports betting during the last 12 months. So it's all around these, and we've talked about this. It's especially in Iowa where it's legal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it's not only legal, it's really available. You just have to download an app.
Yeah, and that's the scary part. That's why it makes it rougher for kids today than it was in our era, where, our era way back when we were in college, Rob, we had to go to a bookie. And that, to me, if somebody was betting with a bookie, out,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's better. I mean, it's the same type of betting, but you are physically going to do something. And that to me is don't even come back. And then going to the casino is not quite as bad to me, because maybe you're just playing some slots or something and out at Riverside, and then what the hell, throw a bet on the the NBA finals. Okay, got it. That's wrong, but you're kind of in a place now that you have the accessibility to DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever on your phone, like you do Twitter. That's a really difficult prospect for, they're competitive people. They compete over everything. You talk, they, all the cliches that they said, he's competitive. It doesn't matter if we're playing, chess or checkers or video games. I mean, they get, I won't say fights, but arguments at least over video games, let alone, just throwing a few bucks here and there on the poker table on a Thursday night, or now, laying a couple of bucks on an NBA or NFL game, but if there's an example, if they did bet on Iowa, South Carolina women's basketball, if any of them did, they're not playing sports ever again for the NCAA. And that's sad, but it's reality. And that's something that will be an example to people. It may sound punitive, it may sound overly harsh, but they knew it. And that's the tough part about this. Really tough part, actually.
Well, a few more numbers from this study. 67% of students who live on campus actively bet and do so at higher volumes, while 41% of the bettors have placed a bet on their own school's team. 71% of bettors lose up to $100 daily. Wow. 16.7% reported their largest daily loss between 100 and 300, 5.9%, 300 to 500, and 5.8 at more than 500. So when we're talking about like this, it's different denominations, it's different frequency, and that's kind of what the NCAA is sorting through right now, because that's what they have guidelines based on, is amounts and frequency.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to Alan Tisdale with Virginia Tech, he hit $400, and I know Chad Leistico kind of reported on some of the breakdown of what this is about. And I think, but when you look at the frequency and the dollar amount, when you're talking about $400, that does not sound like a lot. It is a lot, but it doesn't sound like a terrible amount. But the 100 plus times he bet, that sounds like a lot to me. Now how much you betting? You betting $1, at a time, or, $5 here and $3 there, or what? But, still, that's, the frequency is probably as much of a problem as the actual dollar amount. And so I'll be anxious to see. I mean, if it's somebody who bet $50 because they're a Chiefs fan on the Super Bowl, that one to me is pretty damn innocent. And, okay, you're suspended for X number of games, and in baseball, time served, and that would be fair. But I think when you're looking at, if you're betting on NCAA, or if you're betting 50 times even, I think that's warrant to being out for a while.
And I think, to wrap on this survey, Scott, I think it illustrates what the NCAA is most afraid of, that you have a lot of people, a lot of the student population betting on sports, and you have their classmates playing those sports. It is the temptation for inside information and beyond is really great. And that's what you have to be careful of. I know people are like, well, big deal. Because when we've done this, whether it's been responses to our podcasts on social media, people want to blame people other than the student athletes, but this is important. It's important to keep the integrity of the games.
Yeah. Well, and that's why college athletes aren't allowed to bet on the NBA or NFL in particular, or any sport where the NCAA offers it, because they do have inside information. If we're talking about, again, what we're talking about the NBA final or NBA playoffs, and Keegan Murray is on the phone, not even with Chris, but with another former teammate or something, or maybe it is with Chris, and then Chris is sitting around with a couple other Iowa teammates, and they're like, yeah, De'Aaron Fox is going to play, or Steph Curry was at shoot around today and he got hurt. He's not going to play. And then that passes it around. And then all of a sudden, boom, okay, I'm making a bet, before the odds change. That's unfair for the odds, but it's also, that's how things become compromised. And it kind of works the other way too, which is, what if, somebody at Iowa, what if Luke Lachey is talking to Sam Laporta, about something going on at Iowa, and then Sam Laporta is talking to, one of his teammates, and then they go and bet against Iowa or for Iowa or whatever. And that's what you want to avoid. You want to have the integrity of the event. And on the betting side, you want to have the integrity of the bet. So I think that's really, it's really pivotal. So yeah, the survey was interesting. It's 15 pages. It's easy to download the key findings. And so I think, the numbers are surprising. I guess I would, really be interested in the male female ratio, because if it's 58%, then you're talking about, with men, that's going to be.
And those numbers are probably higher too, because people don't tell the truth.
Yeah, it's true.
Because there's the stigmas, right? You don't want to be somebody who has being that term degenerate gambler. Yeah. You don't want to be labeled as that. So you're not going to admit. And people love to talk about, hey, I won this. I won. Nobody talks about what they lost.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Everybody wants to brag about the times they won.
They'll laugh off a couple, but they're not going to talk totally about losing $10 a day, betting on, how many points the Celtics got in the second quarter against the Heat or something like that, and Lord knows, I've been on the road, and a lot of our colleagues, will place bets from the bar, watching a game, and it'll be on a nothing NBA game in the middle of the season. So,
and you've talked about it earlier, the player props are the ones that are probably the most dangerous in terms of having nefarious activity.
No, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Even if you're in another state, and just to use this example, I'm not accusing anybody, but Keegan Murray tells Chris that, man, I've been throwing up all day.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the prop bet is Keegan Murray, 20 points, 20.5 points over under. How hard is it to, for somebody to go, I'm betting the under on that. He's not feeling very well. He's not going to play very much. And that's really where you want to. And then likewise with college, just because, you feel like, at least with the pros, they're making enough money, you can kind of work through that. But with the colleges, they can be compromised a little bit easier. And we've seen the point shaving scandals, involving a Tom Davis coach team at Boston College way back when. And you want to make sure that they don't, have any issues.
A couple comments here in the chat room on YouTube, Scott. Phil Parker's paw. Hal looks like the guy in the back of the bar that would run numbers and take bets. I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or a burn.
I don't know, man.
As long as I'm making money, I'm down.
Yeah,
I'm looking for a new gig.
I'm scared of you if you're doing that.
And then past it, somebody else who has a name that's too hard to pronounce. I agree it should be looked at closely, sports gambling, but to what end? Why can't they just have their girlfriend's best friend make bets for them? They can, but well, there's a lot at stake for these gambling commissions and states. You'd be surprised at what they can find out. Mm-hmm. That just because somebody's making a bet through their girlfriend's best friend, don't be convinced that can't be tied back to you.
Well, exactly. It sounds easy, like, oh, they'll never find that out. But what happens if that other person gets investigated? What if the girlfriend's best friend or the girlfriend's brother decides, or brother's best friend is doing something else illegal, and he plea bargains and says, hey, I gambled all this stuff, but the reason why I did is because I got all this information from XYZ, and then they take a plea bargain, and then so that's how it used to happen. Yeah. So don't just think that it sounds easy, it sounds plausible, and and then people want to bet for themselves. I don't really want to, when it comes to fantasy football, sure, I'd love to dispense all the wonderful knowledge I think I have, but I also want to win, and fantasy sports to me are the one that's probably the hardest one, that and even tournament pools, if you're talking about, it would suck to me if you're even a basketball player at Iowa and you can't do the NCAA tournament pool, even if you're in it, it's like, yeah, but, granted, you don't want to bet against yourself. If you did it for free, that would be one thing. But then again, when you're talking about fantasy sports, that's fun. You're picking guys, but yeah, even the NFL has cracked down. Jamison Williams, a really good pass catcher for the Detroit Lions, a first rounder, is out 6 games because he made a bet at their facility, and they cut like 4 players who were accused of participating. They were lower end guys. That's why they got cut, but they made a freaking example. So, the NFL didn't play around. He could have walked a quarter of a mile down the street and been fine, but they do not want it anywhere near that facility, and which is completely a double standard when they're sponsored by all these outlets, but still.
But again, they know the rules, right?
They know the rules. They're on all the doors. Baseball, it's on all the rules in the MLB clubhouses. I've been in them, and in fact, so Pete Rose knew the new rules too.
Let's take a little break here. Good time to step out here. Do a read first, and then we'll hear from some of our sponsors. Let you folks know that support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at SUI.org. That is SUI.org, Systems Unlimited. We thank them for their sponsorship and the great work they are doing in Eastern Iowa. Let's hear from a few more of our sponsors. And Scott and I will be back on the other side to talk a little men's and women's basketball and some Big Ten football scheduling. So hang in there. And we're back here on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. I'm sure the people on YouTube get a kick out of watching me go get more coffee and come back here. That you don't get to experience that on the podcast side. So, I encourage people to come on into the YouTube stream every now and then just to see the kind of the silliness that goes on here. Let's go with the return of a really popular player for the women's basketball program, Scott, in Tania Davis. She comes back as basically the director, player development director, that was vacated by another former Hawkeye, Catherine Reynolds, who is now the first president and commissioner of Northwoods League softball. So congratulations to Catherine on that nice achievement. And Tania Davis coming back. She kind of has had several jobs since leaving Iowa, but comes back as director of player development, and he had a 2-year stint as a grad assistant at Clemson. And where was she before here? Omaha. From 21 to 23. So was able to cut her teeth, and she is a 2019 graduate of Iowa and received her bachelor's degree in health and human psychology, excuse me. And she is a recent graduate of Clemson, where she finished her master's in athletic leadership. So she used that grad assistant's job and put it to good use, getting a graduate degree. And this seems like a great addition. She knows the program. She knows the coaches. Seems like a great fit.
No question. And what kind of freaks me out, Rob, and we're old dudes now and stuff. And so when you have, players like Tania Davis, it just seems like, oh, didn't she just graduate like last year? No, it's been like 5 years ago. What? But here we are. And she was very popular, very upbeat, energetic, really a great personality. I think she'll do well in that role, no question. And then I don't want to slight Catherine Reynolds, who also was, she got her law degree. Now she's going to be the first, commissioner in Northwoods League history for women's softball, which I think is a really impressive and important step for women, because we know about all the wooden bat leagues and stuff for men's baseball, but we don't really hear much at all about softball. And I think this is an important step for women, and some equality and building softball, and maybe potentially one day becoming a professional league that can survive and thrive. And I think, and of course, I guess I didn't realize this about Catherine Reynolds, that, her dad was a Major League Baseball scout for like the Reds forever and stuff. So she's the type of person that she might be the commissioner in the Northwoods League for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden you see her as an associate commissioner of the Big Ten or the Missouri Valley or something like that. And then in 15 years, you're like, wow, she's the commissioner of another league because of all of her background. So she's somebody to watch in the future. But specifically with Tania, perfect fit, perfect person to have to help develop some of the younger players that are, a little bit trapped behind the superstars that are coming back.
She was all Big Ten honorable mention in her senior season and on the 2016 all freshman team. Had she not had the ACL injuries, or injury, I should say, as a sophomore, who knows, she may have put up even bigger numbers, but she still scored 1,000 points during her Iowa career. So she comes back with some juice and respect, and she'll do a nice job kind of helping players, as Scott said, develop behind the scenes, maybe kids that you don't see in games yet. And she'll obviously have a focus on the backcourt. In men's basketball news, Scott, we got our Gavitt Games matchup for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Short trip. Don't have to go to Orange, New Jersey for Seton Hall or elsewhere. Just across the state and across the Missouri over into Omaha to play Creighton. I pulled up Seth Davis's, this was a couple weeks ago on The Athletic. Subscribe to The Athletic. That's your PSA for that. Seth Davis has Creighton at number 25. It's had some definitely some transition. Obviously, the main one was Nemhard transferring to Gonzaga, their starting point guard, and that's when you hear the anti-NIL people barking when they see things like that happen. But it is what it is. They've added a couple players, but they've lost some players, and they've got some guys that are in the draft mix, the draft process that we'll see if they come back. As Seth wrote, Baylor Shireman, he wrote as a departure in his previous rankings, he's announced his intent to return for his super senior season. So that is a bonus for Greg McDermott and the Blue Jays. But two other starters, 7-footer Ryan Kalkbrecker and 6'4" sophomore guard Trey Alexander, have entered the draft while retaining their eligibility. Both were invited to the draft combine, so they moved to the departures column. Sophomore forward Arthur Kaluma, who also entered the draft, put his name in the portal on Wednesday. So it's plausible that Creighton will have lost 4 starters by the time the season tips off. That's from Seth Davis at The Athletic. Check that out. Recent, way too early. Top 25. It's too early, but it's not too early.
Right. Well, my thinking on this, and I've gotten some of the other games.
Did you cover the last Iowa Creighton game over in? Yeah, that was not good. For the Hawkeyes.
I do have a funny story about that. Doug McDermott was playing for Creighton, and he and Melson Basabi were on the one of the U.S. teams or something like that, but the year before, I can't remember exactly what. And I remember going into the preview of that game, and I said, okay, what do you got to worry about with Doug playing against Doug McDermott? And he's like, he told me, he goes, I don't have to worry about anything. He has to worry about me. And because he's not a professional athlete and didn't get any NIL money at that point, I said, I'm not going to write that. That's just not going to. And I was probably
Creighton needed no more motivation.
Yeah. That was over in Des Moines, and voila.
You remember the post game. Doug was pretty. He was puffing his chest out. I mean, as he grew up not liking Iowa, so that worked out pretty well for him.
Right. His dad was at UNI and then Iowa State and now Creighton, all around. And funny part is, and this would be the only time I give this guy plaudits, but the one coach in Iowa who thought he could play at Iowa at one of the major schools was Todd Licklider. He wanted to recruit him, but that was just not going to work. So
yeah.
But, I do have some of the other Iowa games here. Of course, they played in San Diego against either USC. They played against Bronny James, by the way. Seton Hall, Oklahoma. They played North Florida on the 29th of November at home. Iowa State is set as well. Let me
what's the date on that Creighton game? I did not. 15th?
14th, I think.
14th of November. So that's early, man.
Yeah. On Pearl Harbor Day will be Iowa at Iowa State. Then the 16th of December is the doubleheader in Des Moines, which we saw the tickets, I guess. They've already sold like 12,600 to that. And they just basically are holding the rest. That's not because of the men playing. We know that.
No, it is not.
Yeah. And then I think I have one more men's game somewhere.
And this is a good time to remind folks that your Big Ten. And again, this is another story that we haven't talked about yet, the Big Ten TV rights deal. As a result of that, there is no more ACC Big Ten Challenge. It's now the ACC, SEC, ESPN. They should just call it the ACC, SEC, ESPN Challenge.
Right.
Because once Big Ten bailed on ESPN, they took their ball and went home, so to speak. So there's no more challenge there. So you have another date to fill if you're a Big Ten team now.
Yeah. And that's one thing I wanted to bring up was that was women's. Fairleigh Dickinson is Monday, the 6th of November. I think it's their opener. The men's schedule at home. We know that they're going to play 10 Big Ten games and they're really important, blah, blah, blah. But when you're right now playing at Creighton, at Iowa State, you're going to play USC /Oklahoma /Seton Hall in San Diego. you better have at least one quality non-conference opponent at home, because it is hard to run this back to your fans, especially. And then you took another game to Des Moines, which wasn't against anybody special, but when you're starting to fill out the schedule, you're going, what are you giving the fans here? What's going on? And so now that you don't have the ACC Big Ten Challenge date, you better bring somebody in, and then maybe and then next year go there. It could be Missouri. It could be Kansas State. It could be, take your pick. I don't give a shit. But
Arkansas.
Yeah. Anybody.
Yeah. Whoever. Notre Dame.
Yeah. I mean, somebody with name recognition.
I guess Notre Dame is ACC.
Yeah. And it could be ACC. It could be Big 10, Big 12.
Yeah.
I think I could see a Big 12, Big 10 challenge at some point too, by the way, with all this, but you got to do
the
that.
Pac-12 doesn't really work anymore because you're taking two of their marquee programs.
Yeah, right. I mean, I suppose you could play individually, like in Arizona or Utah or something like that. But you got to play somebody at home, because you're asking your fans to foot the bill again for all these games. But even in recent years, and when you're playing Duke out in Madison Square Garden, and you're playing up in South Dakota at Sioux Falls, and you're playing, every other year in the ACC Challenge in Iowa State, what are you giving your fans? Why are they, and you could say all you want, well, we're playing 10 Big Ten games at home. I don't care. You're going to have to start playing a few teams at home that people want to see. And that variety matters. And you can't just expect them, and you can't bitch at them because they don't want to go when they're playing Florida A&M on a Tuesday night and then early December, and say, well, we're our fans. Well, you're going to have to give them something here. And that's, the neutral courts are fun and fine for TV. It does nothing for the people who actually pay your salary. Sorry, that's my rant for the day.
You're good. And Iowa was, what were they, 24th? Iowa men, I think, were 24th in attendance nationally last year. Mm-hmm. So as bad as things are, and you and I both talked about this on the podcast, the empty seats were certainly as noticeable as ever last season. And some of that speaks to the lack of interest in some of the opponents that Iowa is playing at home, the pricing, and the trends nationally. So we'll see. I feel like quarter of a century we've been having these conversations, Scott, about men's basketball attendance, and the game's too late, the weather, all the litany of excuses that we go through. But I think ultimately, if you play a really good opponent at home, people will come out.
Well, yeah, it's the difference between, you might not sell many or any more tickets, but you might have more people show up, right, and support your team, and which gives you a bigger lift. I mean, here's the thing. Last year's, they were 24th in the country, but they averaged 12,017 fans at home. That was the 5th worst on record. So that's not good. I mean, you're trending in the wrong direction. It's stagnating. And, a lot of that is, and this year coming up, Rob, I mean, maybe they got a chance to surprise some people. They would surprise me if they're good. They would surprise me if they're anything other than a bubble team at best. But when you don't climb the mountain and you don't get to that area that people want or expect, the Sweet 16 once in a while, when you have NBA players, when you have the best player in the country, when you have veterans who've been there 6 years and have Big Ten records, and you can't get to that second round or that second weekend, then people are going to start to go, I'm not as invested anymore. And then you don't give them reason, and then if you don't play quality teams at home and you're just saying, put a big sign up, game today, come support your team or we'll complain about you. That just doesn't work. Not in today's world. You better give them a reason. And so I don't know, the women, the thing is, when we talk about all the problems at Carver, Rob, we're not talking about wrestling. They've sold out their season 2 years in a row. And even before that, they were pretty damn close. We're not talking about women's basketball, which set the Big Ten record for average attendance that has to put a hold on it. We're talking about men's basketball. So to me, the roots are deeper than just Harvard Hawkeye Arena. The roots are a malaise among the fan base, a malaise that just says, yeah, I can do without it. And you never want to get to apathy. And no. I think they're getting into that territory. And one way to combat that, a small way, get quality opponents that you don't see every year in your building early in the season.
Reminder for folks that did miss the release that came out last month, about a month ago. Iowa's home Big Ten, Iowa men's basketball's home Big Ten games this year. Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Penn State, Purdue, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Ohio State, and Rutgers. So if you're doing, if that went through your head and you were saying, well, who are they missing at home? They don't get Indiana or Michigan State at home. So those are two marquee Big Ten opponents that you don't get at home this season. All the more reason to add a quality non-con at home.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so, they're, in playing in the Big Ten, playing those opponents, there's a lot of positives, but then you start to get into January, and weather and time are a factor. When you start to go, how, and I don't know if it's exclusively an Iowa thing. It sounds like Wisconsin deals with the same issue. And we're talking about two bases that are almost exactly alike, except they wear different colors. Is that if it's at 6 o'clock, hey man, I can't get there. I got to go to work. I won't be able to get there in time, so I'm not going to go. Or if it's 8 o'clock, man, I got to work the next day. What are you guys doing? So 7 o'clock's the sweet spot, but 7 o'clock's not the sweet spot for BTN. So those are, and then you start to throw on weather, parking, lack of amenities around the stadium, in the arena, and on and on and on and on.
Student section placement.
Yeah, exactly. The students don't, they need to be around the court. I mean, all these things that after a while, yeah, they're all excuses, and they're all factors, I should say, but they have become excuses. And as long as that continues, you're just going to see kind of a stagnation among the basketball program. And if they can't reach the second weekend, and if you can't, just reach people's expectations, I think it's just going to be a perpetual semi-purgatory for this program.
Wrapping up with Seth, too early rankings. He's got Michigan State ranked second in the country this year. So really, really good incoming freshman class in East Lansing for Izzo. Maybe this is his last push to get back to a Final Four. But the next ranked team in the Big Ten is Purdue at 15.
Yeah.
Do you have anybody else in here from the Big Ten? No, he's got Ohio State at 24. Yeah. So that leads me to believe that with the experience that Iowa has coming back, and there aren't a lot of high expectations for other teams in the league, that should work to Iowa's advantage. But we have plenty of time to break that down till we get to October or November.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's plenty of time between now and basketball. We got a lot of football to worry about, including where the game's going to be played and all that stuff.
Yes, let's segue to that, Scott. Last Thursday we postponed till Friday because there were some rumblings that there could be some football scheduling format announcement. For the uninitiated, USC and UCLA will be joining the Big Ten next year, and they need to figure out whether or not they're going to have divisions and what the scheduling format would be. And again, subscribe to The Athletic. Scott has a number of stories outlining what the possibilities are in terms of format for scheduling in the Big Ten. So check that out. What's going on here, Scott? What in the hell is the holdup?
Well, many of you may or may not have read, the story from Pete Thamel over the weekend about the last present that Kevin Warren left the Big Ten, which was, some of the issues with the COVID year, and they owe Fox or $40 million, or they're going to have to subtract $40 million somehow from their coffers and give it back to Fox. Plus issues with Kevin Warren giving NBC a Big Ten championship game in 2026. Pete reported all of that. And now
he wasn't
stuck.
supposed to give that to NBC, right?
Yeah, yes, that's true.
That's a big faux pas.
Yeah. And, part of the issue is that, during COVID, they gave up, even more, 10% more of their equity. 61% of BTN is now owned by Fox, and BTN operates officially their scheduling for football. So Fox owned all of that, and then they just said, "Oh yeah, we're going to give this over here to them, even though you're supposed to have it." So it's like, here we go again. This is one of the things that really were more complaints by the ADs, especially, and the coaches about Kevin Warren were these types of things that just didn't listen, didn't build consensus at all, did things on his own, didn't really understand the layouts.
And part of it, I think he had trouble being a conduit between the presidents and the athletic departments.
No question. I mean, when you're talking about even the COVID decision, and this is the difference between Jim Delaney and him, or, most commissioners in that role, is that they would try to push it down the road as opposed to making a final decision. And whether it was just him, he and the presidents kind of unilaterally decided to cancel the season. Delaney would have said, let's just keep delaying this. Let's just not make any rash decisions. Let's just do this. And at some point they would have started to play probably a month earlier, or at least 3 or 4 weeks earlier. And they would have gotten in a pretty full season, most of their games, that sort of thing. Well, Kevin did it on his own. And last year with USC and UCLA, there was a lot of help in getting USC and UCLA to the Big Ten. And then he was making big time pushes on adding more teams out west. However, the networks were adamant that they were not going to pay more for those schools, because those schools don't generate more revenue. USC and UCLA did, Notre Dame would, but not even Washington, or Oregon. Then even with that push, then the schools did something that was unusual. And I talked to some of them last fall, and that was, no, we don't want any more expansion. Instead of hedging or, well, we're working through these situations, blah, blah. They were adamant, no, we don't want any more. We want to, and he was wanting to add. So it became a stalemate, and he would not have won that vote if they would have tried to push for other people. Now you have the TV issues, and talking to ADs in the in the fall, in the winter, early spring, they were, I know I would say, okay, what are some of the priorities here? And it's like, one of the first was, we've got to get the TV contracts completed. And it always seemed like a formality, like, all right, just sign the freaking contracts, move on, because they made the big announcement. We know what they're about. And now they're getting into territory where it's like, oh crap. And apparently some of the the big time schools that get their way more than you'd think they do, Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, were saying, hey, we didn't know we were going to have to play November night games, which is laughable. Everybody knew that, but they're just complaining to complain. And then now, we didn't know we were going to play on Black Friday. Penn State complains more than anybody about anything. And they were the ones that were going to get stuck on Black Friday, which they did. But as a concession, because Michigan State should get team of the year in the Big Ten for doing these things, they said, okay, we'll move the game to Detroit and play it at Ford Field on Friday night. And then Michigan has to move its playoff games that weekend, because of it. But So there's all these little issues. They're going to get solved, but they're a pain in the butt. And that's why we don't know what's going to happen in 2024, because they can't figure out 2023 yet.
How much? I mean, I think it seems obvious here that the TV is paying a ton, has the influence of what has at least some influence on the scheduling format they go with here, right?
No question. I mean, they all signed up for the X amount of games. NBC signed up for 15 games this year and 14 throughout in the future. Night games on Saturday nights. This was what was announced. And
games that used to be on ABC, right?
Yeah, ABC or ESPN. Yeah,
right.
And same thing with CBS. CBS signed up for, and this will happen more next year, but this year it's going to be in parcel, is 2:30 kickoffs our time on CBS. And then Fox will get the big noon window that it wants. Fox gets the majority of its first, choices, not all of them, but most weekends it'll get the first choice. So it's just going to be, that's what they signed up for. That's why they're paying this much. It's not that, oh, well, we didn't know we're going to have night kickoffs in November. You knew that. We're only talking 3 weeks anyway, Rob. I mean, we're talking the first weekend is already of November is already a network week. The only thing in the past, like Iowa with Minnesota in 2015, that was on the second weekend. And schools can move their games tonight. It's just a matter of both schools had to agree to it. Now it's unilateral. But I think it was the Ohio State, Michigan State as a concession. We'll go to that the second Saturday night in November. Nebraska has come out and said, look, we'll play anytime. We don't care, because they did in the Big 12. I don't think it's that big of a deal. So like week 3, I could see Nebraska at Wisconsin. What's the damn difference between playing at 2:30, where it's dark from the second half onward in late November, and playing at 6 o'clock? There's no difference.
So we've been doing this a long time. The weather in November is so unpredictable in this region of the country. I mean, you could have, I've covered Black Friday. We've covered Black Friday games at Nebraska where it's balmy.
Yes. But we've had everything from sleet and freezing rain to 65 on the field. And it's so, you don't know. I mean, hell, go back to that 2015 season with Iowa, where the week they're playing Minnesota and they have the grapple at the gridiron, and it's 60 plus degrees. It's beautiful, gorgeous fall afternoon. And the next week against Purdue, they get 9 inches of snow before the game. So anything's possible. And it was a pain in the butt for an 11 o'clock kickoff that day, let alone at night. It's a pain, but they're making this way more difficult, and they're trying to like big time. And I don't like the big timing part of it. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa, I think Iowa for sure was part of that, where they're like, we're not going to play Friday night games at home. Other than Black Friday for Iowa, and Iowa volunteered Labor Day weekend if necessary. But, at some point, and I understand that, because some of them have medical centers that are attached to the stadiums or close to the stadiums, or you're talking about Penn State. We've both been there. That's a small town with 107,000 people with, 2/3 of them coming from either Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. I mean, it's crazy. But after a while, you're like, dudes, just shut up. Just play ball. I mean, you did it during the COVID year, so just do it now. I mean, suck it up. Next year it'll be USC and UCLA, and then there'll be teams complaining about going to the West Coast on a Saturday to play that game.
So what's your best guess? The flex? Yeah,
flex. Sounds like flex is pretty much, it just needs to kind of get the final rubber stamp from everything. It'll be pretty bare bones from what I understand, and things can change, as we know. But where I think things are, that to my understanding, is that Iowa does get 3. Iowa will play Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska every year. Michigan will play 2 every year. But like Penn State will only play 1, Michigan State will play 2. It'll be Michigan and Penn State. But most of the others will only play 1. I mean, Wisconsin and Minnesota will play 2, because they'll play each other in Iowa. But I don't think Nebraska will play more than one. And then USC and UCLA obviously will only play one. So it's really pretty limited in how that
Where you
works.
got Illinois, Northwestern.
Yeah, and I don't think Illinois and Purdue are going to line up every year. I'm not sure. That one I don't know.
Indiana, Purdue, obviously.
Yeah, for sure them. So, Ohio State might only have Michigan, I think. Even though and this was kind of the reason it was weird. Penn State wanted to play, had played Ohio State every year since it entered the Big Ten. But Penn State didn't really want to do that anymore.
Does Penn State get to play Maryland and Rutgers every year?
No, it'll just be Michigan State. So, yeah.
So Maryland and Rutgers have to line up, right? Yeah. We definitely do not want to see that rivalry go away.
Yeah, no, that one.
November, Friday night in November.
Yeah, I mean, this year we got Penn State, Michigan State. Next year, it's definitely going to be Maryland and Rutgers. And it'll be so big they'll have to move it one year to Giant Stadium or the Meadowlands, and the next year they'll have to be at Baltimore. I mean, no, I don't know. So yeah, everybody gets at least one. Iowa, I think, is the only one that gets three, and then there's 3 or 4 or 5 that get 2. So that's kind of where things sit now. Again, who knows? This thing is just dragged on like everything else Big Ten related for the longest time.
And it seems like the Iowa State is pretty solid right now. I know I still, every now and then you see people when these scheduling discussions happen, stories happen, they're like, well, why can't, we alternate Iowa State and play them, 3 out of, or whatever it is, 4 out of 6 years or whatever would work out just mathematically in terms of home and away. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's imminent.
No, there are possibilities for that to be eliminated. And it really starts and ends with, well, I think Gary Barta can make the biggest one, but also university officials, which seem to lose to the state in every single situation. But if they decided, you know what, you don't have to worry about making sure that we play 5 Big Ten games on the odd years. We can do whatever you want, because they synced it up. The Big 12 did the same thing for Iowa State, where they synced up the home and away based on, Iowa had a major factor in that because of its annual rivalry. So if Iowa went away from that, then they're not going to play 6 games on the road in any given year. So then Iowa State could conceivably go away under that. But Gary Barta and Kirk, the regents, and Governor Reynolds, she'll come down on that because, lower government, right? I mean, sorry. But she'll be the one that she said a couple of years ago when Iowa was threatening to pull back after the band fiasco, and she was like, not a chance that series would go away. So
that's the easiest support she can get. I mean, she's got everybody on her side. Well, I shouldn't say everybody. She's got the vast majority of people that are on her side if she's fighting to keep the Cy-Hawk football game.
Yeah, because the majority of Iowa State fans believe that, and understandably so. They don't really have another, other than Kansas State and maybe Kansas, they don't really have any natural rivalries anymore. Nebraska's gone. Mizzou wasn't really much of a rival anyway. They're just in the same conference for 100 years. So Iowa represents a rival, and Iowa has more than one. And, and really, they're the silent majority in this. There are more Iowa fans that want to keep the Iowa State rivalry than want to get rid of it. It's just the ones we hear are the ones that don't. And, because I always joke that I call it kind of the mother-in-law rivalry, because on my wife's side of the family, 3 graduated from Iowa State, 2 graduated from Iowa, and then there were some others, and one of them was an Iowa State original, and then a master's at Iowa, and then another 2 graduated from UNI. So she roots for everybody, and guess what? I don't have a problem with it. She's paid enough tuition to make it work, but that's the way a lot of people think, especially in central Iowa, where, you got an office of 10 and it's 5 and 4, and, Iowa State in one way or the other. And then the other one is somebody either doesn't care or likes Nebraska.
And Colorado's coming back to the Big 12, right?
Yeah, you never know. I think that's actually. I did ask Jamie Pollard about that the other day, and he was like, well, I don't know."
Whereas if there was no chance, he
Yeah.
would have just shot it right down.
Yeah, it was like, so is there a chance? I asked him, I said, so is there a chance that a former member could actually join the Big 12? He goes, I don't know who you're talking about. I'm like,
Dion and Ames, prime
yeah,
time,
yeah,
prime time in
yeah,
Ames.
yes. Can you imagine that? Oh man, that would, well, I'd probably end up covering that game.
Um,
Hopefully it comes in like a Western Michigan game that day.
let's wrap up with your day at the George Kittle camp at Kinnick Stadium last weekend. Scott, tell the folks kind of what that was, kind of what the approach isn't the right word, but how that was organized, kind of what was the goals there for that camp, and kind of what you were able to witness.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It was one of two there. The days there are two different camps that I think it's Octane football camps out of the out of Central Iowa put together, and one's George Kittle this month, and next month it's Alan Lazard. I think he's like North Polk or somewhere is where he's going, but this one was at Kinnick, and it was really interesting, to see. I think they had 500 kids that showed up. It was just a spectacle, as you'd imagine, with George, kind of coming out, to out of the tunnel and running down the tunnel and slapping hands on both sides and kind of moving around, doing George Kittle things, doing the gritty and doing like the teardrop football drop and stuff like that. So, he was just being George Kittle all day, but it was good. I had a long conversation with him about different things, about his time at Iowa, what he learned. Some of that will be filtered in, a couple of things will be filtered into future stories. But, one aspect I think we both are aware of, we've talked about enough, and just to kind of highlight that a lot of the issues that have been under the spotlight at Iowa last 3 to 4 years really have been more racial, but it also had some personality to it too. And the thing was with with him, he was beaten down quite a bit too because of his personality, and he didn't really want to go into it too deeply, but he said, "I love Iowa. I wouldn't be who I am today without them." But the free spirit, free flowing energy stuff's not too high on many people's radar up there, or high on the list of things that are important. So while I learned a lot from there, I also learned things I didn't like. And the personality, George has always had that, but he's really been allowed to let it flourish and showcase now. And it's completely different today than what it was. I mean, would Sam Laporta be able to be kind of who he is at Iowa in 2018 or 19? Maybe, but George Kittle certainly was not that way. And it took him some time to, go from the fifth team and to be the player that he was. But I think there was, it was just really a fascinating depth to him, his personal journey, how he became the player he was and is in the NFL, and kind of, how his career is kind of shaped up.
Yeah, it's he's really done a nice job, promoting his position, you know, with tight end and helping to highlight that position. And as you said, it seemed like we didn't really get to know the real George Kittle till he left Iowa, and that's kind of a shame.
Yeah. I was probably the closest one with him throughout the years. I stayed with him I was with him on that Friday and Saturday of the draft at his house. I thought he might be a second or third rounder. He ended up being a fifth rounder. So I spent the whole time with him just to be there for that moment when the call came and when he celebrated with his family and stuff. And I got to know him pretty well. Like one of the thing is with him, he's so high energy, like his rest, WWE. And I remember talking to him at the Outback Bowl his last year, and he was almost more excited to go to the WWE event after the Outback Bowl than he was the Outback Bowl. And he's like, he had nosebleed seats and everything, but he didn't care. He was so, and then now he's, like last month, he's on WrestleMania and gets to do a clothesline and everything like that. So, there was a lot of fun that, he had to say about it. And, so I got to know him on a pretty good level over the years, but still the George Kittle, I think today would be a little bit more able to showcase his, be more himself, not have to hide himself as much today at Iowa than he did then. But he's still one of the most interesting players I've ever been around.
Yeah, no doubt. It's good to see him come back and people in Iowa be able to celebrate his success and him be able to connect with kids, and nothing wrong with that. I'm sure the Alan Lazard event will be really well received as well for the folks over there in central Iowa. Got to see Alan play in high school. Went out and scouted one of his games when Iowa was still in the picture for his services. Yeah. But we all know Paul Rhodes got upset about that. So.
I know. That was funny.
All right, Scott, I think that that'll wrap there. Anything else we left out? I did notice that I will direct people another article that I enjoyed this week that Scott and Stu Mandel did on projecting where and when football games will appear on TV early in the season this year. And I was very happy to see you guys had Iowa with starting the season with 2 11 o'clock games.
Oh yeah, me too. I had to make sure of that. I was like, yeah, let's do it. 11, get it over with.
I'd be happy if they played at 9.
Yeah, right.
That works more into my schedule.
My days are often, I when Andy Peterson used to be, I guess, he's not there anymore with, I would do like the bumper brigade and stuff for Learfield and at 8 a.m. And so I was leaving the house a lot of times at 7, for an 11 o'clock or, because it's always 3 hours before kickoff, but I'm fine with earlier, get done earlier, get home earlier, go to bed earlier, or try to stay up later for the other games, which has always been challenging for me.
Well, I've got to clear some time later today and this evening to catch up on Mayans, because as Scott texted me last night, we're fans of that show. Final season started last night with a couple of episodes, and I was out shooting soccer, as I said earlier in the podcast, so I have to catch up. Am I going to be happy with what I see?
It was pretty good. It was a little bit better than last year. They started off with a bang. So
good.
The second one ran a little later for me, and I'm like, I'm watching it. I'm going, I already DVR'd it, so I'll have to rewatch it. But I was like, oh, like, dang it, I'm trying to stay awake. I like this. It's not boring me. It's just old man here.
We'll talk. Maybe we could break down the episodes next week, so we don't have any spoilers on this episode, because I want to relax and enjoy. I was going to try to push it last night when I got home, and I'm like, no, I'll wait till tomorrow when I have some more free time.
There you go. Yeah. 2 episodes back to back. It was a lot, but
looking forward to it. The good thing about the DVR is I can zoom through the commercials, and there are a lot of commercials on FX.
Yes, there are. So, they're like the channel where, you'll see like, they'll have like 16 well, that's probably not that one, a league of their own, and it'll be like 3.5 hours.
I know.
Like, come on, man. It's like 5 minutes of the movie and 5.5 minutes of commercials. It's like, geez.
And they have a lot of good shows too, so you have to put up with it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for listening to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Thank you to all of our sponsors. We really appreciate it. And we will be back next week when we arrive on June. So creeping a little bit closer to the football season. And I'm sure in June we'll have a little bit more meat on the bone when it comes to getting ready for the college football season. So thanks again to everybody for listening. And Scott and I will be back to talk to you next week. Say goodbye, Scott.